There's a wonderful custom at Naropa that we start things bowing in, and sometimes when we are completed with a task that we have, we offer the merit available from that task to someone. Today, I would like to offer the merit of our session together to the memory of Bella Abzug. She just passed on, and you know, all of us have had something shift in us over the last 50 years about the place of women in the universe. And I want to give her credit for helping us make that shift and to see that clearer. So today we're going to talk about transpersonal sociology, and the subtitle of that was When Souls Do Their Togethering. When I get to look where and how did a certain thing start in the world, a certain way of thinking start in the world, there seems to be a current, just as there are currents in air and in water. There are currents in consciousness. And there's now a current of consciousness that's been running through human minds for a while. And every once in a while a person discovers that and goes along with that current. And that current is the one that leads to the vision of the ultimate harmony of life on this planet. You know? So, want to call it Pure Land, want to call it Messiah, you know, want to call it that vision that says, just as I am in my body when I'm healthy, and I feel that wonderful zip-a-da-doo-dah feeling, and then I ask, wouldn't it be great if this whole other body, you know, would feel as zippity-doo-dah about it? I remember Tim Leary liked to talk about this. Could we raise the ecstasy quotient? Right, that's what he said. Could we raise the ecstasy quotient? Well, first of all, we want to raise the health quotient of the planet, because there's a lot of ouches around. But that sense that we have, that something draws us to this. And every once in a while, when we get to the place of despair, we sort of lean back. And then, if we allow it, this vision comes in and says, don't despair. We are on the road. We're going to get there someday. And this will be this wonderful way of living and being together. You know, it pays sometimes to revisit those waking up moments in adolescence when we were so fired up with our vision of the ideal. Yes, I want to live for that. That's clean, that's pure, that's moral, that's right. You know, when we sort of made that commitment. And when you visit back there, you see that there was this vision. And if you were to say, where does this vision originate in a reductive way? In other words, etiology of that vision, where did it come from? So Papa Freud says, yeah, you were in the womb, everything was so wonderful there. And you would like to have that to be the existence for all time. And so since you can't find it to get back into the past, you project it to the future, and you make it a big social thing, but basically all that it is, it starts from the memory in the womb. Another point of view might be to say, that vision draws us. It keeps pulling us. And it wants to bring us to that place. And so what would it be like if we lived that? You know, what would it really be like if we lived that? So every one of the ways of understanding human beings has a contribution to make about that. Behaviorism would say, if you could possibly reinforce altruistic behavior for people, then we would live in that world. When you come to Jung, for instance, he would go a little higher than just traffic control, you know? And he would say, when that wonderful, great new story, the story of Earth's becoming, comes in, that great myth comes in, it also talks not only about how we behave in situations and what we do, but it also talks about how we would feel. And if you allow yourself this wonderful fantasy of saying, oh, what will this feel like? You know? One of the expressions that people have is, I want to be in that number when the saints come marching in. There is an element of something wonderful to happen in the world, and this story is unfolding, and we are participants, actors, if you will, in this story, and how wonderful that is. And then if you would come to humanistic psychologists, and you would ask them, what is your vision of that? And they would say that we would be able to share meaning if we could possibly get all the people on the planet to feel and to share meaning. So that we would wake up in the morning and we'd sort of have a feel that from the rising of the sun unto its setting, to continue with the psalmist, praise is the name of the Lord, you know? That sense of feeling that everybody in the world will be in that meaning state. That is the Messianic period. And then comes transpersonal psychology and says, well, there is a realization and intuition of the oneness of that organicity to which we all belong. We are part of that. And that intuitive awareness, we don't arrive at it by reasoning. We arrive at that by having a deep sense of identity. You know, what is it when I say I know for sure? How do you know for sure? I intuited its sureness, okay? How do you know that? Because it is the closest to the core of my being. It's the closest identity that I can get to. I share that identity. And if you look from that transpersonal sense of what it would be like when those saints come marching in, where everybody would be able to have both the ways in which we behave toward each other so well and trained by behaviorism, and our feelings so well guided by what we can learn from Jung, and then we go to Viktor Frankl and he guides us into a place of where we would be with meaning together, and we come to the transpersonal perspective where we would say the realization of our connectedness lived, you know, when we live that realization of our connectedness, that's what it's all about. So when I gave myself to ask this question, what would it feel like on any of these four levels of being? I got to ask myself, could this possibly happen if only individuals do what individuals need to do. Imagine if all of us were under the spiritual direction of one of the excellent spiritual guides, and imagine also that we would not be lazy and we'd follow through with everything that is and keep working at that. And imagine then that now we have it. There still is missing something that has to come in here, and that's the connectedness. Most of the time when you ask spiritual directors, guides, what is it that we need to do together, you often get the thing, well, you can work on yourself, you can't work on someone else. If everyone will work on themselves, we'll get to that place. And I can't say it isn't a little bit right, you know? But there is something that emerges when a certain group energy begins to flow together, that there is a current among us happening. That current is neither our being active or being passive. That current, from the transpersonal perspective, you get to see the oneness, the identity with all that we have. Then you say, from that place, that there is, in this connection that we feel with one another, that this is not what I am doing to you, or you are doing to me, but this is totally interactive. It can't have a single pole of my will or your will. That's so hard to learn. I mean, this is the difficulty of partnering lies just in this thing that we, learning how to so do things together, that we have to create a new linguistic form. You have active and you have passive, and you must be able to say interactive. And Thich Nhat Hanh likes to speak of interbeing for that reason, you know. So I asked the question, are there not some laws, just the same way as there are laws in sociology, are there not some laws of how do aggregates of people operating on the transpersonal level, how do they interact, you know, to learn about that kind of interaction. And there seems to be something happening when there is a social critical mass. And I don't mean only bodies, but of intentionality. If there is a social critical mass of intentionality, that something is being created. And in Tibet you would speak about this as a thought form. Those of you who have read about Alexandra Neal's experiences, how she conjured up with a thought form of a lama, and she got him together, but to get him to leave was much harder at the end. In other words, the reality that undertakes. Can you imagine a thought form created by a group of people really dedicated to creating this new thought form that has to happen? What they would learn about it is that with a certain intentionality and a certain focus of energy, there is a coalescing of all these inputs, and it seems to become something else. It seems to take on a life of its own. And in fact, this is not something that happens only with great intent. It happens with everything. It happens when one little monkey decides to wash his sweet potato before eating, and before long other monkeys get it, and in such a way that is not local, that you can't say one monkey went and showed it to another monkey. It jumped islands. And he says, you know why this is happening? Because there is a morphogenetic field. There is this field of form. In this field, the crystal learns what kind of shape to come into. And he has an interesting experiment about that, in which a new compound that would crystallize hasn't yet learned what shape to have. And you might get that if you did it simultaneously, one in Australia, let's say, and one here, the two forms of the crystal might be different. And it is only after a certain number of crystals take on this form that somehow this impresses itself on the matrix, on that template that is around. So, in fact, we might say that everything that we have are such aggregates, such holons, and these aggregates have energy, an energy of their own. So, the question is, could we possibly discover what the laws are for optimizing the effect of people who give themselves to this kind of consciousness that would create a template that would shift the life from its atavistic, seeking out almost its destruction, to a place that would actualize that vision with which we began, that is that wonderful harmonious vision. So when I talked of domesticating peak experiences, I just want you to know this file has been renamed While Crafting High Synchronicities. It doesn't have that sense of working in the kitchen, that domesticating has, but all right. So, but the intent behind this phrase is really that I want to say, is there something that we can intentionally focus and do, which is of the nature of what people have done in liturgies before? It is the puja. What can we offer? How do we give thanks, for being privileged to be alive? How do we do that? So, I think there are some laws. We can find those laws. And if we find those laws and we can learn how to apply them, the likelihood is that we could be proactive in reshaping the template toward survival, toward that integration, toward that ideal state. So, if I'm going to keep coming back to this question that has to do with grace and with it just being found suddenly, it occurs as grace, or whether it is brought about by some kind of sacred technology, the question comes up, can a morphogenetic field be constructed with intent? All the track record of the past looks like it wasn't altogether with intent that it came about to be. So, could we steer, or are we going to be drifting? I think it is necessary that we do it anyway. We haven't got much of a choice. And if I were to find good words for it, I would say our task is to access the miraculous order of being as an upaya science, okay? The question again is, I want to access that miraculous order of being. Miraculous means that lives so in the now, that is in a beginner's mode, beginner's mind place. And so it can change into anything. Because as Rupert Sheldrake points out, by right, what we call laws of nature are just habits that she has. And it's also possible on some habits to go cold turkey. And do you understand where we are going with this? So, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had that kind of a science that would show us how to do that, and to tap the possible good that is ahead of us. So I'm going to leave this dangle for a little bit, and I'm going to go and visit other planes of being. Friday night, before we begin our Sabbath celebration, we often begin, almost every Shabbat, we begin with Shalom Aleichem Malachi HaShalom. Welcome, O angels of peace. As if to say, during the week, pretty distracted, and I don't know much about, barely can survive, but now Shabbos is made and we are about to relax and celebrate, and I've become aware that there have been some angelic entities that have been steering me through the week. Wow, we made it, we managed. And so we greet those angels and we thank him for the job that they did for the week. I think a lot of our despair comes from the from the idea that we are really alone, that there really is nothing else. There are no other beings in the whole universe. And this planet was sort of, some people call it that experience that schizophrenics report, the whole world is like cardboard, It's not really together, it's stupid and so on. So we have underneath that, we're close to despairing, we feel that. But when we start giving the universe more credit than that, and we say, come on, it's much nicer than that. Don't you see a miracle here? Don't you see something beautiful there? And so there's more consciousness, there's more life in it. So we can see that. But if we think we are the only ones around and there aren't others who are helping us, who are getting us into that place, and we are really not alone in the universe, and we are part of that greater whole, then you begin to consider maybe what they were talking about, angels, had some bearing. In other words, if I go to Ken Wilber's language, I would say those are the holons, the higher togethers that there are. And that came out so beautifully when His Holiness and I were having this conversation in Dharamsala, and it came out so clear that I was just a mouthpiece for the angel of Judaism, and he was the mouthpiece for the angel of Buddhism. Do you understand? For that great template of wisdom, energy, insight, Buddhacita, call it whatever you want to call it, that big chunk of this wonderful stuff. And so I'm doing my part, he's doing his part, but on other levels, there is communication going on that is template changing. See, and that's a very important thing. So, are we the only ones who are doing things? And you read, how do we understand the universe? So there was this guy, he was working for the government in Sweden, and his name was Emanuel Swedenborg, and he was as left brain as you can get until he was about 50-odd years old. And then, boom, something happened. He began to see and to hear, and he wrote over 20 volumes of Arcana Celestia, stuff that he had gotten in when he was in that wonderful state of mind, and has given us a Bedeker's travel book about heaven and hell. And it's a remarkable book, Heaven and Hell by Emanuel Swedenborg. What you get to is that he has this notion that all of sentient beings of the universe form what he calls maximus homo. Okay? That there is a kind of human. Well, the Kabbalah says, of course, you're talking about Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days, You're talking about Adam Kadmon, that that most primal moment of the arising in God, the idea of a human, of a person, you know, in that very first moment when this is happening. And so each one of us have a notion of that. And then Swedenborg describes this, that this is so, and that this body of God has many parts. And this people sits in this part, and that people sits in that part, you know. And he has all citizens of earth, as it were, forming part of that body of Maximus Homo. That's a remarkable vision. In Judaism, you speak of the hosts of Michael and the hosts of Gabriel, you know. In other words, that a Gabriel is like a Toyota, you know. And there's a whole bunch of these going around. Do you understand? It's like a brand name for a certain energy of angels. I tell you, when we got in this conversation, all the other guys were saying, it's our turn now, it's our turn now. But His Holiness and I didn't want to let go. We were into angels. And it was just wonderful. Almost like you could have a sense that the place was filled with that kind of aliveness, as if there were others there. All right. There are some people. So now we know that these are these fields, these morphogenetic fields that we want to change, and that we have to take into consideration that there are also other elemental beings on other planes, on other levels on other vibratory levels, and that we form with those beings a wholeness. And so when I look at what was the name of the last meeting? Contact, the movie Contact, right? It's trying to say there, you know, you can make contact with that. The question that we have is, dare we mess with those morphogenetic fields that are around? Are we not, in a way, saying the same thing that the people who are trying to do genetic engineering that we aren't so happy with? And isn't messing with this template even worse than genetic engineering? Genetic engineering might deal just with this tomato that has some fish genes inside, you know? But what about messing with the system files of consciousness of the planet, you know? That's a heavy question. So, if we didn't have to, we wouldn't have to. But we have to. We can't solve our problems and our issues fast enough because of what we already spoiled. So we really need to do something. We need to get in the system files. We have to take risks and see, maybe it'll crash, maybe it won't crash, but let's see, what can we do about it? And we have to become, to some extent, responsible beings for ourselves. If I were to say what's wrong with our situation as it is something akin to the 2000 year, you know, second millennium stuff that's going to happen to computers and on the internet. If they aren't going to solve this in time, there's going to be a lot of chaos, going to be a lot of problems. And I have a sense that if we don't solve shifting the template from the destructive society that we have at this point, we aren't going to make it, so we really have to get into the system files. So, I think we don't have to take the big risk yet, but we can create places and cells where people would meet and deal with that if they're so moved to do that. We're a certain avant-garde, as it were, of, how would I say, reality techies would be working together and check out what needs to be done and learn how the upaya that are not only upaya for the individuals, but the upaya that have to do with connections with people.
Could you explain what upaya is?
Upaya, skillful means. Okay. When I look at what teamwork it takes to create a stealth bomber, you know, how many people have been on that team? What sophistication has gone into it? I realize that this is the work of many, many people who work together on a goal. And look what kind of sophisticated stuff they were able to put together. I look at what's happening at Microsoft, you know, whether you like him or not, over there, this is just the place is burgeoning with ideas and stuff that people are getting into. How are we going to make it work? How are we going to network together? And yet, when it comes to simple conflict resolution between individuals, couples, parents and children, people in the workplace, we have so little sophistication about conflict resolution. To come with the question, what do you do with a recalcitrant other, like Saddam Hussein, short of using violence? In other words, using violence is what you don't want him to do. So how else are you going to get him not to do that by means that are not violent? And I'd like to see that people would check out, learn how to make this happen. I look at what happened in the past. Did we learn about skillful means for group stuff? A lot of the ways in which churches, synagogues, such groups, faith groups, have worked together was by creating political bodies that were hierarchical. It was always a question, who's on top, who's going to call the shots? And yes, you were able to move people by those, I would say, totalitarian structures. A certain amount of harmony was created. And when the high Middle Ages are being seen, you know, from a point of view as to what developed at that time, then we say, yes, it was good. It is good to have a Holy Roman Empire, you know, that would go and spread very, very far, and there would be connectivity and so on and so forth between countries, and there's pax, you know, there's peace happening there. That's wonderful. But the but is that it was hierarchical. It was driven from on top. I don't think I want to learn those manipulative methods and go back and say, how did they run those things in the past, you know? Because I don't think I want to learn from that. That's the last paradigm. But when I look at the way in the holiness churches did their thing, and the shared Quaker silence, and candomblé, you know, where everybody could be ridden by a god. You don't have to be a specially educated or ordained person to have that privilege. So yes, I think from those freer aggregates, from those freer churches, we can learn something. And this is what the Chavurah movement has tried to do too, to create structures of living room congregations of people who wanted to, felt that they had a spiritual thing to share, but they didn't want to have it in that package in which they would be told what to do. They wanted to be sharing as equals, and each one to have the Holy Spirit within them give expression to things. I think of the Latihan, that as it's practiced in Subud, there you have a practice in which a half hour you go totally intuitive. You go to that place where you don't even think about what's what, you know? But whatever wants to come out of you, you allow it to come out for a half hour. And that is a way in which that is being practiced. It's a remarkable thing. Later on, Osho copied from there and made his chaotic meditation on the base of that, but it wasn't of the same quality as the Latihan. The sweat lodge. Look in the sweat lodge. Do you have a sense that, yes, there's a guy who sort of runs the sweat, but does it feel that that person runs it in a way? Everyone gets a chance to do their own prayer. And there is this solidarity that comes when people say, ho, ho, everybody's sweating and it's getting very hot. And at that point, somebody pours out his heart and says, I'm just a simple person, God, but I need your help in this and that, And people speak, feel along. There's this, every time they say ho, there is a sharing, there's a togethering that people are doing. So it is with the peyote ritual, with Unyo Vegetal in the Daime Church, that people are not told anymore what it is they should be thinking and feeling, but are being invited to think and feel and share that with everybody. And that's a remarkable thing. In other words, people are working on the problem of how to change the template. There are some people who are working on that problem, and we can learn something from them. And the new liturgies that are there, the raves, I go back to the 60s. One of the kinds of Friday night services that I conducted at that time was no lights in there, but a strobe set up. And we were dancing the liturgy of the Friday night service throughout. That was the whole thing that we did at that time. And you can imagine as the strobe was going from slower to faster to faster to faster to faster, and then slower again to end at the end of the service. and it was over. So we tried doing some of these things, and we learned something from them. And what we learned, some of it filtered down to the pew today, but I think there's more. I'm thinking of the Grateful Dead, and what kind of a spiritual thing this was for people who had the feeling, I got to go there. I got to get my soul fix. Haven't been with the Dead for a while. So I'm going to go back and do something with the notes that I have over here instead of freewheeling it, and because there's some good stuff that I don't want to miss. I'm talking about something that I call share flow. The body is in a state that I call share flow. If any of my limbs, muscles need something, somehow it gets delivered very quickly. If I hear something that's troubling and shocking, adrenaline, I'm going to be switching right quick into the sympathetic nervous system and be in fight and flight and so on. See how quick the body responds to things. Could you imagine what it would be like if a world would be in a state of share flow? So we're coming back to the question, what can we do to become so that we would be in that state of being? So we need a sociology, because when complex aggregates get together, something new emerges, and that new that emerges, we can in some way shape. We can do life craft on how those new emerging aggregates, what it'll be, what kind of an angel we're going to create. So just as a way as the computer has been using something like the local area network, which making transparent to each other the files, Could you imagine if you sit with another person and you really want to be intimate with that person, and you have the opportunity of sending without censorship, make accessible all the files. That it's like giving the password to your life to another person. how would you feel? Oy, you know? Should I do it? Should I do it? It's terrible, you know? But on the other hand, you know, I used to sometimes sit with people and do these long eye contact meditations. And it feels at that time when you make this long eye contact that suddenly this person is going to be able to get into your guts, read every secret and so on and so forth, and find out that, quote, your shit stinks. And something happens inside and then you say, but his does too. You know? What's the worst thing that he'll find out about me? What's the worst thing they can find out about each other? And to be able to make that opening. Oy, you know, if I could do this at every wedding that I celebrate with a couple, to be able to plug him in that way, maybe some of them wouldn't happen, you know. But that's what annulment, by the way, was. When the church was seeing a situation where somebody was not aware of a condition of their partner, and they were fooled into accepting something that they wouldn't have accepted had they known, that's ground for annulment. You know? So at any rate, if we could make this kind of sharing happen. So the local area network, the parallel processing, I want to talk about that. I can't do the whole job myself. But how wonderful it is sometimes when I pick up a catalog and I see what some of my colleagues are doing. I feel, oh, so wonderful, I don't have to do that one, you know. It's wonderful, it's happening. If we could, at the time that we are doing our processing, each one on our own, if we could be plugged in together, then we would get to something that is not merely arithmetic, that this becomes geometric progression. There's so much greater what can happen. And so therefore, if all of us could learn how to get on one frequency and hold hand on that frequency together. You know, in computers you call it the handshake. Right? It's like all the peripherals are saying, we are ready, you know. And something happens now between them, ready to receive and to return and to affirm and confirm. This is what I'm trying to discover. Is this possible between human beings? Could we begin in smaller groups doing some of these things? And to see what else would come into that. So this is a sociology that is of a new order. Most sociology operates on the basis of quanta. You know, there is no sociology of quality yet. The whole, if I were to say the one tool that sociology has used has been statistics and dealing always with quanta. So is there a possibility of creating a sociology of quality? And that would be a new order. It would be a sociology of holons, so that we would see what coheres groups together and which smaller groups form larger groups. And this is what Ken Wilber speaks of when he speaks of the holons. So I'm going to have to skip some things, and it doesn't matter. I have great curiosity about something that keeps coming out and then gets lost again, comes out and gets lost again, and that is psychic research. What is it that happens in telepathy? You know, nowadays they don't like to say clairvoyance; they call it remote viewing. You know, but it's the alte Kalle in a neuem Schleier, you say it in Yiddish, is the old bride in a new veil. But the notion was, is there a possibility of getting beyond the means so that there could be direct contact? what you would have to call on the subspace level almost, yeah? And then the question comes up that we have with Professor Reine, who was first at Duke and then had his own institute, and I had met some people who were in the Parapsychology Foundation in New York and talked with them. By and large, it's always been an individual, let's say, reading a card and the other one guessing it, and so from afar. It wasn't like groups. And I'm curious about something. What would be if I were to pull out a deck of Zener cards and give you, for instance, a list, to mark down which one it is, and we run through 25 runs of these cards, and then we would see how many hits did we get. So that would be parallel stuff happening. But could you imagine what would be serial stuff happening? Okay? There's one guy is on that place where he's pulling in the intuition and he's sending it over to the next guy who picks it up from him. Do you get that? So that there would be an amplification of that current. Maybe we would be able to get to greater precision with that. So it's a question that comes almost from computers and from batteries. Can we make a battery of souls? Could we make a battery of minds? There's a wonderful tale. One Sabbath noon, the Baal Shem Tov wanted to teach his disciples a lesson. The disciples who were in the inner circle were very sort of elated and proud of themselves. We are now at this time with our master, and all the other poor shmigegs they're reciting the Psalms while we have this wonderful, wonderful time to be with him and to hear his great and deep teachings. And the Baal Shem Tov says to them, I'd like you to sing a melody. Told them which melody to sing, and it was one of those deep melodies, a sort of a switch, a toggle between reality melodies. And it took the people to a place when he then said, and now put your arms on the shoulders of the people who sit next to you. And then he completed the circle. And at that moment, where they were, that faded away. And instead they heard and saw the stream of prayers rising up from the people who were reciting the prayers down there. And how they felt that in all their awareness and wisdom, they hadn't experienced such great thirst for God as these people had, and who were expressing it at that time. So they were chastened by that experience. Then later on he removed his hands, and then they were right back in that space. Now, you get that sense, the shamanic world has so many of these things that we could explore and get to see what could we bring together if we used some of these ways that come to us from the past. So that is still looking to the past. And now I want to look a little bit in the direction of the future. Let me see, how many of you have read or seen anything by Michael Hutchison on the brain-mind technologies? Okay. It's worthwhile to check that out. These are those machines, some of them use machines that are those little blinkers that go off and on at certain rates, sometimes accompanied with sound that goes. And what happens is that it entrains your brain to states of being that are not the same states of being as if you're in a shopping mall. Okay? So you get into alpha or into theta, and you can be in a different world and experience a different way of seeing the universe from those worlds. And up to now, I've only read about what they have done when they were doing it to one individual. And so again, I'm curious, what would happen if a number of individuals were to be entrained into that state at the same time? And would that enhance their possibility for telepathy? Because in a sense, that's what I'm asking for. I have the feeling that we won't heal until we are going to be in share flow. If my toe wasn't telepathic with my nose, we would be in trouble. Do you see that intercommunicative thing that's happening? If one part of the body needs something, it arrives, it gets there very fast. And if I want to be in the same state, the cost of compassion alone that such a state would cost us. It's not, I'm not talking just about what you will know with your head. Can you imagine what you will feel? One of our masters said, you want to be a Hasidic Rebbe? Then you have to tell me, can you feel the pangs of labor of a woman 3 miles away? And if you can't be a Rebbe. Get that sense? If I ask, what is happening to the Bodhisattva, sitting in that center of the mandala, feeling everybody's agony along, and being compassionately present to that, not fixing it, not changing it, just being present in that sense of compassion. I think that would be part of the price we would have to pay for getting into telepathy. But you can also imagine what it would be like if we were to feel that way. How quickly we would respond to things that are not good, like in the Middle East, in Rwanda. You can go so many places in the world. Could you understand, how this would move us, because there's an ache there that needs to be attended to. There's a pain there. So one of the costs of becoming telepathic would be that. And I don't have a sense that we would not flinch away from it if we didn't get compassion stretchers. I would like to see retreats to become more like compassion stretchers. Could you get the sense of coming out from such a retreat with your compassion now embracing more? And it still doesn't say you got to change something, but getting that message, the compassionate message, isn't going to let you rest if you haven't done your share. And now comes the other side of that research in this form of sociology that's needed is to know which is my part and which is not my part. There are some people, I wish I could name them by zodiac, who are people who grab initiatives from you. You're about to do something, right? How do you know this is your job or it's not your job, so that you can stop the initiative grabbers from doing their thing, so that another person who might even be better suited and for whom this job has been waiting, but he is slower to respond because maybe feeling more responsible, So, to learn what is my task and what is not my task is very hard. And now I want to talk about something else that's really off the wall. We need to have mediums. We need to have people who will read us in that way and be able to tell us, this may be very attractive to you, but Bubby, you did this last time around. You got to be very good at that, but there's now another job that's waiting for you. Tell me what's been giving you the greatest amount of trouble, then I'll tell you what your job is, So it's a different story. Here too, if we would be able to screen people into such situations. One of the other things that I've discovered about working with groups of people is working with the circle of the zodiac. Could you imagine if all of you were to line up according to your birth date in the year, the birth date, so that you would have all the Aquarians on one side, clumped together as they go, but they also go in this slow process. This one is on the cusp, and this is one we're closing, and this one is in the center, and so, and you make a circle like that, and you check, then breathing together, is there an increase in harmony there? And now as we stand, and we want to slow down time. Remember we talked about how fast the flywheel of time is going. So if we were to stand in such a circle and send the current back to go a little slower, and see if we couldn't slow down the current of time that way by breathing upstream, as it were, So these are wonderful opportunities that I hope that somehow we're going to puzzle over and ask in our next interaction that we're going to have with people, how do we do this as togethering, Because the only way to get it together is together. So learning togethering, I think, is what will bring us to the possibility of seeing that early ideal state of the world really get closer to a reality. And now we bow out. Bella, I hope you like this.